The bell above the door of Miller's Roadhouse rang with a thin, metallic chime. No one paid attention at first. Sunday mornings in the diner always sounded the same: coffee pouring, forks clinking against plates, the low hum of the jukebox struggling through an old country song. Outside, the Arizona sun had barely climbed over the highway signs, but inside the corner booth was already alive with laughter. 8 men in leather vests occupied the booth like they had every Sunday for 11 years. It wasn't written anywhere, but everyone knew the rule. That booth belonged to them. Razor sat at the center, his broad shoulders filling half the bench. His coffee was black, untouched by sugar, steam curling slowly into the fluorescent lights above. At 61, he carried the kind of face that told stories without speaking: knife scars, sun lines, the quiet weight of a life spent on open roads. Across from him, Bull was in the middle of a story, and losing badly. "You had nothing," Spider said, grinning as he leaned back in the booth. "Pair of threes and you shoved like you had a royal flush." Bull scowled into his coffee. "I had a read." "On what?" Viper asked. Spider raised his eyebrows. His pity. The table exploded with laughter. Ace slapped the tabletop hard enough to rattle the salt shaker. Diesel laughed with his whole chest, the kind of laugh that rolled like thunder. Even Hawk, who rarely laughed and rarely spoke, allowed a small crack of a smile. It was the same rhythm they'd lived for years. Coffee, stories, brotherhood. Then Bull stopped talking. His eyes shifted toward the door. Razor noticed immediately. Bull didn't freeze often. Razor turned slowly. A little girl stood just inside the doorway. 4 years old, maybe 5 at most. Blonde curls slipped from crooked pigtails that someone, probably the child herself, had tried to tie that morning. Her pink dress hung loose and wrinkled, too big for her small frame, the hem brushing the floor. Her sneakers were splitting along the sides, the canvas peeling from the rubber. She held a stuffed rabbit against her chest. One ear was missing. The other hung by a thread. But what caught Razor's attention wasn't the clothes. It was the way she looked at the room. Not lost, not scared, focused. The conversations around the diner softened one by one as people noticed the same thing. The little girl wasn't looking for the waitress. She wasn't looking for help. She was scanning the room like she already knew exactly where she was going. Then she started walking. Her sneakers squeaked softly on the linoleum floor. Squeak, squeak, squeak. Past the counter, past the booths, past 15 adults who would have been the natural choice for a child needing help. She walked straight toward the corner booth, straight toward 8 men in leather vests, straight toward Razor. None of the men at the table knew that the little girl walking toward them carried a photograph in her pocket, a photograph with a crooked note written by a dying man they had once called brother. She stopped 3 feet from the table. For a moment, she didn't speak. She simply looked at Razor. 3 seconds passed, long enough for the entire diner to feel the tension. Her hands trembled slightly where they gripped the stuffed rabbit, but her chin lifted with a stubborn determination that didn't belong to a child. Then she pointed, directly at Razor's forearm, at the tattoo, the phoenix. Its wings spread wide across his skin, flames curling upward from ash. Every man at the table had one. They weren't identical, each phoenix was slightly different, but the symbol was unmistakable. It was the mark of the Brotherhood, the kind of tattoo you didn't buy. You earned it. The girl's finger hovered inches from the ink. "My daddy has the same tattoo." The words landed in the diner like a grenade. Razor's coffee cup stopped halfway to his lips. Spider's grin vanished instantly. Ace's hand froze on the tabletop. Diesel's laughter died in his throat. Hawk leaned forward slightly. Bull lowered his cup with careful precision, as if sudden movement might break something fragile in the air. Razor stared at the little girl, then at the phoenix on his arm, then back at her. Her blue eyes held steady. Older than they should have been. Eyes that had already seen too much for someone who should still be watching cartoons and chasing fireflies. "What's your name, sweetheart?" Razor asked quietly. The girl swallowed once. "Lily." "Lily what?" She clutched the rabbit tighter against her chest. "Lily Harrison." The name struck the table like thunder. Bull's coffee cup slipped in his hand. Hot coffee sloshed across the table, spreading slowly across the wood. Nobody moved to wipe it up. Spider grabbed the edge of the booth. Ace whispered something under his breath and shook his head. Diesel pressed both palms flat on the table. Hawk closed his eyes for a brief second. Razor felt his chest tighten. The world inside Miller's Roadhouse suddenly felt very small. "Harrison," Razor said carefully. "Who's your daddy, Lily?" The girl hesitated. Then she spoke the name. "My daddy's name was Jake Harrison." She swallowed, but everybody called him Shadow. The name did not echo. It landed. Heavy, like something dropped into the center of the table that no one knew how to pick up. For a moment, nobody breathed. Bull's coffee cup tipped in his hand and hot coffee spilled across the wood, spreading toward the salt shaker in a slow brown tide. He didn't notice. His eyes stayed locked on the little girl. Spider's fingers curled around the edge of the booth, like he needed something solid to hold on to. Ace leaned back slightly, shaking his head as if the sound of the name had physically pushed him. Diesel stared at the table. Hawk opened his eyes again and fixed them on Lily, studying her face the way a man studies a photograph he hasn't seen in years. Razor remained perfectly still, but something behind his eyes shifted. "Shadow," Bull finally said. The word came out rough, broken around the edges. Just the name. Nothing else. Spider turned away and dragged a hand down his face. "Jesus," Ace whispered. The jukebox continued playing in the background, some slow country song about lost highways and broken hearts. The ordinary sound of it felt almost disrespectful in the silence around the booth. Razor stood slowly. The leather of his vest creaked as he moved. Chairs scraped lightly across the floor as the other men shifted to give him room. He stepped around the table, each movement deliberate, careful, like he was approaching something fragile. When he reached Lily, he lowered himself onto one knee so they were eye level. Up close, the resemblance was impossible to ignore. The shape of her nose, the stubborn set of her jaw, the way her chin lifted when she spoke. Razor had seen that exact expression 1,000 times across desert highways and smoky bars. Shadow's expression. Razor felt something inside his chest crack open, something he had sealed shut 8 years earlier and buried beneath miles of road and years of silence. He cleared his throat. "Your daddy," Razor said softly, "was one of the best men I ever knew." Lily's eyes widened. "You knew him?" "Knew him?" Razor let out a short breath that almost turned into a laugh but didn't quite make it. "Kid, your daddy saved my life." The girl leaned forward slightly. "Really?" "More than once." Behind Razor, Bull stepped closer, his huge frame casting a shadow across the floor. "We all rode with Shadow," he said quietly. Every man at the table nodded, even Hawk. Lily hugged the stuffed rabbit tighter. "My mommy said Daddy used to ride motorcycles with his brothers," she said. "That's right," Razor replied. Her eyes drifted to the phoenix tattoo again. "Did you ride together a lot?" Razor nodded slowly. "Long time." Bull rubbed the back of his neck and stared at the floor. 15 years, he muttered. Spider spoke from behind them. "Best damn rider any of us ever saw." Ace added quietly. "Best man, too." Lily absorbed this with the serious focus of a child trying to assemble a puzzle from pieces that didn't quite fit yet. Then she asked the question that tightened every chest in the booth. Why did he leave? The words were simple. There was no accusation in them, only curiosity. Razor glanced over his shoulder. Bull looked at Hawk. Hawk shifted slightly where he sat. For a long moment, no one answered. Finally, Hawk spoke. "Because of you," he said gently. Lily blinked. "Me? You weren't born yet," Hawk continued, his voice calm and steady. "But your mom was carrying you." The girl frowned, trying to follow. "Your daddy loved riding," Hawk said. "Loved the road, loved the Brotherhood." Razor nodded slowly. "But he loved your mama more," Hawk finished. "And he knew someday the road might take him away for good." Bull folded his arms. "So he made a choice." "What choice?" Lily asked. Razor looked directly at her. "He chose to be your dad." The words hung quietly in the air. Lily stared at the floor for a moment, processing. Then she nodded slowly. "He told me something like that." "What did he say?" Razor asked. "He said," Lily replied carefully, repeating the memory word for word, "that the bravest thing he ever did wasn't riding motorcycles." The men leaned closer. It was leaving them. Razor felt the weight of that sentence settle deep inside his chest. That sounded exactly like Shadow. Never bragging. Never explaining. Just doing what needed to be done. Lily looked up again. He told me if things ever got really bad, she began. Her small fingers dug into the stuffed rabbit's fur. I should find the men in the picture. Every biker in the booth froze. What picture? Spider asked quietly. Lily slipped her hand into the pocket of her oversized dress. She pulled out a photograph. The edges were bent, the surface scratched from being carried too many times in a small pocket. But the image was still clear. 8 younger men standing in front of a row of motorcycles under a blazing desert sunset. Leather vests, wind-blown hair, wide, reckless smiles. Shadow stood in the center with one arm thrown around Razor's shoulders. Razor stared at it. He remembered that night. Flagstaff. 23 years ago. None of them had known yet how long the road would be. Lily turned the photograph over. On the back, crooked handwriting filled the corner. The letters leaned unevenly, as if written by someone whose hands were shaking. Shadow's handwriting. Razor felt the world tilt slightly. Daddy wrote this before he died, Lily said. Her voice stayed steady, but her fingers tightened around the photo. He said if I ever needed help, I should find the men in this picture. She held it out to Razor. He took it carefully. The paper felt fragile between his calloused fingers. The note read, Sundays, Miller's Roadhouse. They'll remember. I love you forever, baby girl. Dad. Razor swallowed hard. Behind him, Bull made a sound that wasn't quite a word. Spider turned away again. Ace covered his mouth with his hand. Diesel stared at the photograph like it might disappear if he blinked. Hawk closed his eyes for one long second. Lily looked up at Razor. Her blue eyes were steady. Was he right? She asked quietly. Would you help us? The photograph rested in Razor's hands. The paper was thin from years of being folded and carried, the corners softened by time. Shadow's handwriting leaned across the back in uneven lines, each word pressed harder than the last. Razor read it once, then again. Around him, the table had gone silent in a way that felt heavier than before. Not shock this time. Something deeper, something older. Bull exhaled slowly through his nose. 3 weeks before he died, Lily said quietly. Razor looked up. My mommy told me, she continued. His hands were shaking so bad he could barely write, but he said he needed to finish it. Her voice was steady, but the stuffed rabbit in her arms trembled slightly. He told Mommy that Sundays were family. The sentence landed softly. Spider looked away again, rubbing his jaw. Yeah, he murmured. They were. Lily shifted her weight on the linoleum floor. He said if things ever got really bad, I should come find you. Razor folded the photograph slowly. What kind of bad? He asked gently. The little girl swallowed. For a moment she didn't answer. Then she spoke. My mommy is sick. The words were small, but they carried the weight of a storm. How sick? Bull asked quietly. She can't breathe right anymore, Lily said. The diner's fluorescent lights hummed faintly overhead. She has tubes in her nose and a machine that makes a humming sound all night. Sometimes she coughs so hard she can't talk. Razor felt his jaw tighten. She saw a doctor, Lily continued, but the doctor said she needs an operation. Spider leaned forward slightly. What kind of operation? I don't know, Lily admitted, but Mommy said it costs a lot of money. She hugged the rabbit tighter. We don't have any. The men exchanged quick glances. Razor crouched a little closer so she didn't have to raise her voice. How long has she been sick? A while, Lily said. How long is a while? The girl thought about it carefully. Since Daddy died. The words dropped quietly between them. 6 months, she added. Bull closed his eyes briefly. And the doctors say she needs surgery? Razor asked. Lily nodded. But we can't pay for it. Her voice didn't crack. Not yet. Razor waited. He had learned long ago that silence sometimes gave people the space to say what mattered most. Lily took a breath. And the man who owns our house keeps yelling at Mommy. The temperature at the table seemed to drop. What man? Diesel asked. The landlord. Her small fingers twisted the rabbit's fur. He bangs on the door and shouts. Razor's eyes narrowed slightly. What does he shout? Lily hesitated. He says we're going to get kicked out. Bull's massive hands slowly curled into fists. He says Mommy is trash. A low sound escaped somewhere behind Razor. It might have been Spider. It might have been Diesel. It might have been all of them. And one time, Lily continued carefully, he yelled at me in the hallway. Razor's voice stayed calm. What did he say to you? The girl stared at the floor. He said nobody wanted us there. The diner seemed to shrink. Forks stopped clinking. Conversations faded into murmurs. Razor felt heat spreading behind his ribs, but he kept his voice steady. Where is your mommy right now? At home. Does she know you came here? Lily shook her head slowly. She was sleeping. You left the house by yourself? I walked. Bull blinked. You walked here? Lily nodded. It's 12 blocks. The table went completely still. You walked 12 blocks alone? Ace asked. Yes. How did you know where to go? And, Lily pointed to the photograph. Daddy told me. She spoke the words with complete certainty. He said if things ever got really bad, the men in this picture would remember him. Razor looked down at the photo again. The younger version of himself stared back, sunburned, reckless, laughing beside Shadow under a desert sky. Spider spoke quietly behind him. He trusted us. Yeah, Bull muttered. He did. Lily looked up at them again. My mommy cries at night, she said. The words came out softer now. Sometimes she thinks I'm asleep. The rabbit trembled again. But I hear her. No one moved. She says she doesn't know how to fix it. Razor's throat tightened. And I didn't know what to do either. For the first time since she'd walked into the diner, Lily's voice wavered slightly. So I came here. She looked at each man in turn. Her blue eyes were wide and serious. I tried to remember everything Daddy told me. Her fingers brushed the photograph again. Sundays, she whispered. They're family. The sentence hung in the air like a key turning in a lock. Razor rose slowly to his feet. Behind him, chairs scraped the floor as the other men stood as well. No one spoke. They didn't need to. 8 men looked at each other across the table. Bull nodded once. Spider's jaw tightened. Ace was already reaching for his phone. Diesel grabbed his keys. Hawk's eyes sharpened. Bones straightened his shoulders. Viper pushed away from the booth. Razor looked back down at Lily. Her small frame seemed even smaller now standing among them. He placed one large hand gently on her shoulder. Your daddy was right, he said. Lily blinked. About what? About us remembering. Her grip tightened around the rabbit. You'll help my mommy? Razor didn't hesitate. Yeah, sweetheart. Bull stepped forward beside him and dropped to one knee. His voice rumbled like distant thunder. Kid, he said, we'll move heaven and earth for you. The words were not loud, but they carried the weight of an oath. Lily's brave expression finally cracked a little. You promise? Razor glanced at the photograph in his hand one last time. Shadow's grin stared back at him from 23 years ago. Then he slipped the picture carefully into the inside pocket of his vest, right over his heart. Your daddy saved my life, he said quietly. And we don't forget things like that. He looked up at the men around him. Spider, I need an address. On it. Ace, call the chapter treasury. Ace was already dialing. Diesel, get the trucks ready. Keys jingled. Hawk, start making calls. Hawk nodded once. Bones, Razor added. Find out everything you can about lung surgery. Bones was already pulling out his phone. And me? Viper asked. Razor looked at Lily. You stay with her. Viper crouched down beside the girl. You like milkshakes? He asked. Lily wiped one eye quickly with the back of her hand. Chocolate. Good answer, Viper said. He offered his hand. Her tiny fingers wrapped around 2 of his. Razor watched them walk toward the counter. Then he turned back to his brothers. The quiet Sunday morning at Miller's Roadhouse was over. Coffee's $3, Spider muttered. Razor tossed a 50 on the table. Keep the change. He pulled on his gloves. Saddle up. The words were calm, but everyone at the booth understood exactly what they meant. 8 men moved for the door. 12 blocks didn't take long in a truck, but it felt longer with 8 motorcycles rolling behind them. Bull drove. His massive hands wrapped around the steering wheel with careful precision, like he was handling something fragile instead of guiding 2 tons of steel through the Phoenix streets. Lily sat beside him with the seatbelt tight across her small frame, the stuffed rabbit resting in her lap. Behind them, the convoy moved in formation. Chrome flashed in the sunlight. Engines rumbled low and steady. People on sidewalks stopped and stared as the bikes passed, 8 leather-clad riders moving together like a single machine. Lily pointed ahead. Left here. Bull turned. Then straight, she added. How far straight? Bull asked. Until you see the store with the broken window. Bull glanced at her. You walked this whole way? Yes. He shook his head quietly. You're a tough kid. My daddy said sometimes you have to be. The broken window store appeared 2 blocks later. Beyond it stood a narrow building squeezed between a laundromat and a pawn shop. The paint was fading. The concrete walkway cracked like dry earth. One of the laundromat machines could be seen spinning through a dirty window. Bull parked. The motorcycles lined up along the curb behind them. Engines died one by one. Kickstands dropped. Suddenly the street was silent except for the distant hum of traffic and the steady whir of dryers inside the laundromat. Windows along the block filled with faces watching. Razor stepped out of his truck and crouched in front of Lily. Which one? She pointed toward the building entrance. Second floor. Razor nodded. Apartment? 4B. They moved toward the stairwell together. The air inside smelled like bleach, trying and failing to hide something older underneath. The stairs creaked. Lily climbed slowly, placing both feet on each step like small children do when the stairs feel too big. The bikers stayed close behind. Second floor. The hallway was narrow and dim. Doors lined both sides. Peeling paint. Cheap carpeting worn thin in the center. Lily stopped halfway down the hall and pointed. That one. Apartment 4B. The door had a dent near the bottom. A clear, boot-shaped dent. Razor stared at it for a long moment. He didn't say anything, but Bull saw the way his jaw flexed. Lily knocked. Small knuckles against hollow wood. Mommy? Nothing. She knocked again. Mommy, it's me. From inside came the sound of coughing. Wet. Deep. The kind of cough that rattled through walls. Locks clicked. A chain slid. The door opened a few inches. Then wider. Emma Harrison stood there. She looked younger than Razor expected. Mid-30s, maybe. But illness had aged her in cruel ways. Her skin was pale, stretched tight over sharp cheekbones. Dark circles framed eyes that had clearly gone too many nights without sleep. Blonde hair had been pulled into a loose knot that had started collapsing hours ago. A thin oxygen tube ran beneath her nose. The portable tank dragged behind her across the floor. But her eyes, sharp and green, locked onto Lily instantly. Lily Marie Harrison. Her voice was weak, but fierce. Where have you been? Lily shifted nervously. I went to find... You were gone when I woke up, Emma interrupted. Her breathing quickened. I thought you'd been taken. I thought... A violent coughing fit cut her off. She grabbed the doorframe to steady herself as her body doubled forward. Lily rushed toward her. Mommy. I'm okay, Emma managed between coughs. Then she noticed the men behind Lily. The coughing stopped. The silence returned. Emma straightened slowly, instinctively pulling Lily behind her. Her eyes moved across the hallway. Leather vests. Tattoos. Hard faces. Then she saw Razor. Who are you? She asked. Her grip tightened protectively around Lily's shoulder. What are you doing with my daughter? Lily stepped forward before Razor could speak. Mommy. They knew Daddy. Emma froze. The hallway went still. What did you say? They're the men from Daddy's picture, Lily explained quickly. The one with the motorcycles. Emma's eyes drifted down. To Razor's forearm. To the phoenix tattoo. Her hand flew to her mouth. For a moment it looked like the strength simply drained out of her body. Her knees buckled. Bull moved instantly. One massive arm caught her before she hit the floor. Easy, he said gently. Emma stared at the tattoo again. Her lips trembled. Daniel, she whispered. The name barely escaped her breath. You rode with Daniel. Razor stepped forward. My name's Razor. He kept his voice calm. I was your husband's chapter president. Emma studied his face carefully, searching, measuring, trying to reconcile the stories she'd heard from her husband with the man standing in front of her now. Daniel talked about you, she said softly. All the time. Razor nodded once. He talked about riding through the desert at night, Emma continued. About the stars, about the wind. Her voice faded. He missed it. I know, Razor said. Emma tried to smile, but it collapsed into another coughing fit. This one lasted longer. Much longer. Bones pushed forward through the hallway. "Let me see," he said quietly. He guided her toward a chair near the small kitchen table. The apartment was almost empty. A mattress on the floor. 2 plastic chairs. A folding card table. Stacks of unopened mail and medical bills scattered across it. Bones clipped a small device to Emma's finger. The number on the screen blinked. "Bashatsi." He frowned. "Your oxygen's low." "I know," Emma replied weakly. Razor stepped into the apartment and looked around. Eviction notices sat among the papers. Electric bills stamped final warning. A hospital envelope with a balance due. He glanced at Lily. She stood quietly near the doorway, clutching the rabbit. Watching everything, Razor turned back to Emma. "Mrs. Harrison," he said. His voice was steady but firm. "Tell me everything." Emma looked down at the pile of bills on the table. For a moment, she didn't speak. Then she whispered the name that had been hanging over the apartment like a storm cloud. Vincent Marsh. Razor didn't recognize the name, but the way Emma said it told him everything he needed to know, and somewhere deep inside his chest, a very old promise began to wake up. The name sat in the room like a bad smell. "Vincent Marsh," Emma repeated quietly. Razor didn't recognize it, but Bull did. He didn't say anything yet. He simply leaned his shoulder against the wall beside the door, arms folded, listening. Razor pulled one of the plastic chairs closer to the table and sat down across from Emma. The folding card table between them was crowded with envelopes, red stamps, and the quiet evidence of a life collapsing under paperwork. Electric bill. Hospital balance. Eviction notice. The word eviction had been stamped across the top in bold red ink. "How long has he been coming around?" Razor asked. Emma wiped her mouth with the back of her hand and took a slow breath through the oxygen tube. 3 months. "Phone calls first," she continued. "Then letters." Her eyes drifted toward the dented door in the hallway. Then he started showing up. Razor's gaze followed hers. "Banging on the door," she said, yelling through the walls. The room stayed quiet. "What kind of yelling?" Diesel asked from the doorway. Emma hesitated. "Things you shouldn't say to a woman who's sick." Bull's jaw tightened. "And things you definitely shouldn't say to a 4-year-old. Razor leaned forward slightly. "What happened with Lily?" Emma looked toward the small kitchen where Lily sat on the floor with Viper, drawing on a scrap of paper with a pen someone had found in the truck. Viper had his long arms folded around his knees, watching her quietly. Emma lowered her voice. "Last week he caught her in the hallway." The words came out slowly. "I was having a bad day. Couldn't get out of bed." Bones glanced up from the oxygen monitor but said nothing. "She went downstairs to check the mailbox," Emma continued. "He was waiting." Razor didn't blink. "What did he do?" Emma swallowed. "He leaned down over her and told her we were deadbeats." Her voice trembled now. "Told her nobody wanted us in that building." Bull pushed away from the wall. The movement was small but heavy. Emma rubbed her forehead. When Lily came back upstairs, she didn't cry. That seemed to hurt Emma more than anything else. She just climbed onto the mattress next to me, held my hand, and said she wasn't scared. Her eyes filled with tears. "She's 4. No one spoke. The silence was thick with something colder than anger. Razor finally looked down at the eviction notices again. "How much?" Emma blinked. "What?" "The rent," Razor said. "How much are you behind?" 3 months. "Number, 1800. Bull exhaled slowly through his nose. Razor nodded once. "That's it?" Emma let out a small, exhausted laugh. "That's it if you ignore the hospital bills." She gestured toward the envelope on the table. 4,200 from Phoenix Children's for tests they ran before they even diagnosed me." Spider whistled softly. Razor didn't react. He was looking at something else now. The oxygen tank beside Emma's chair. The thin tubing. The way her chest rose and fell too fast, too shallow. "How long since you saw your doctor?" he asked. 6 weeks. "Why?" Emma looked embarrassed. "I couldn't afford the co-pay." Bones rubbed his chin slowly. "That's not good." "I know it's not good," Emma said quietly. Her voice softened. "I was trying to figure something out." "You shouldn't have to figure it out alone," Bull said. Emma looked at him. "You don't owe us anything." Razor shook his head. "That's where you're wrong." He leaned back slightly in the chair. Your husband tackled a man through a plate glass window to keep a knife out of my throat. Emma blinked. Razor continued. He wrapped a belt around my leg when my bike went down on I-40 and I was bleeding out on the asphalt. The room had gone very still. He sat in a hospital chair for 3 days straight, making sure I didn't die. Emma looked down at her hands. He never told me that. That sounds like shadow, Bull muttered. Razor folded his hands together on the table. That man was my brother. He glanced toward the kitchen where Lily was now holding up a drawing for Viper to see. And when a brother leaves something behind, he paused. It becomes our responsibility. Emma's eyes shimmered with tears. You don't even know me. I know enough. The room stayed quiet for a moment. Then Razor stood. His chair scraped lightly against the floor. Here's what's going to happen, he said calmly. Emma looked up. We're getting you out of this apartment today. She blinked. What? You and Lily are coming with us. I can't just... You can, Razor said. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried authority. We've got a place where you can stay, clean beds, real food, no one banging on your door. Emma stared at him. This is crazy. Maybe. He shrugged slightly. But it's happening. She shook her head slowly. You can't just walk into my life and start fixing things. Razor's eyes softened just a little. We're not fixing your life. He nodded toward the photograph, still tucked inside his vest. We're honoring his... Emma closed her eyes. For a long moment, she didn't move. Then she let out a long breath. When she opened her eyes again, they were wet. Okay, she whispered. The word barely reached the table, but it was enough. Razor turned toward the hallway. Diesel, he called. Diesel appeared in the doorway instantly. Bring the trucks around. How much stuff we moving? Diesel asked. Razor glanced around the apartment. The mattress, the 2 chairs, the stack of bills. Not much else. Not much. Bull stepped forward. What about Marsh? Razor looked at him. For a moment, the 2 men said nothing. Then Razor spoke quietly. Go talk to him. Bull smiled. It was not a friendly smile. I'll take Ace and Viper. Razor nodded once. Just talk. Bull snorted. Of course. He grabbed his helmet from the counter. Ace followed him. Viper stood and handed Lily the drawing. We'll be back soon, kid, he said. Lily nodded. Okay. The 3 bikers headed toward the stairwell. Outside, engines roared to life. Inside the apartment, Emma watched them go. Then, she turned to Razor. Are they going to hurt him? Razor slipped his gloves back on slowly. No. He paused. But he's about to learn something important. Emma frowned. What's that? Razor looked toward the dent in the door one last time. That's some promises, he said quietly. Don't expire. Vincent Marsh's office sat above a row of discount storefronts 3 streets away from the apartment building. A fading sign on the door read, Marsh Property Management. The office lights were on, though the blinds were half closed against the afternoon sun. Inside, Vincent Marsh sat behind a desk that looked far more expensive than anything in the building he managed. Papers were stacked in careful piles. A polished pen set rested beside a framed photograph of his wife and 2 teenage boys standing in front of a roller coaster. The room smelled faintly of lemon cleaner. Marsh liked things tidy. It helped him pretend everything was under control. Outside, 3 motorcycles rolled to a stop directly in front of the door. The engines shut down. The sudden silence felt heavier than the noise had been. Bull swung off his bike first. Ace followed. Viper leaned back against his handlebars, watching the windows. Bull walked to the door. He didn't knock immediately. Instead, he removed his leather gloves slowly, finger by finger. The soft scrape of leather filled the quiet street. Then he knocked. Once. Hard enough that the glass in the door rattled. Inside, Marsh looked up from his paperwork. He frowned. The knock came again. This time louder. Marsh stood and walked toward the door, irritation already forming on his face. We're closed on Sundays, he said through the glass. Then he saw them. The irritation vanished. 3 men in leather vests stood outside the office. The patches were unmistakable. Marsh hesitated. Bull knocked one more time. Slow. Deliberate. The door opened. What can I... Marsh stopped mid-sentence. Bull stepped inside without asking. Ace followed. Viper closed the door behind them. The office suddenly felt smaller. Much smaller. Marsh cleared his throat. If this is about rent collection hours... Bull placed his gloves on the desk. The soft thump of leather against polished wood echoed in the quiet room. Marsh stopped talking. No one else spoke either. The ceiling fan ticked overhead. Tick, tick, tick. Marsh shifted in his chair. I run a legitimate business here, he said quickly. Ace leaned casually against the wall. Viper stood near the door, arms crossed. Bull remained standing in front of the desk, still silent. Marsh felt sweat beginning to form along his collar. If you're here about tenants, he continued, everything I do is within contract law. No one responded. The fan ticked again. Marsh looked from one biker to the other. Finally, Bull spoke. Emma Harrison. 2 words. That was all. Marsh's face changed immediately. Oh, he said. Yes, well, she's behind on rent. Bull didn't blink. She owes 3 months. Ace tilted his head slightly. Does she? Yes, Marsh said quickly, grateful to have something factual to hide behind. $1,800. I've been extremely patient. Bull slowly pulled a folded stack of cash from his vest. He counted out $200 bills. Each one placed neatly on the desk. The sound of paper against wood was crisp and precise. When he finished, the stack sat perfectly squared in front of Marsh. That's $2,000, Bull said. Marsh stared at them. That covers the rent. Bull leaned forward slightly. And the patience. Marsh swallowed. Well, if the balance is paid... Bull's voice cut gently through the sentence. There's more. The ceiling fan ticked again. Tick, tick, tick. Marsh waited. Bull didn't rush. You went to her door. Marsh stiffened. I collect rent in person when necessary. Bull ignored the explanation. You kicked the door. Marsh shifted. I don't recall. You yelled through the hallway. That's... You cornered a 4-year-old girl. The words landed like stones. Marsh's mouth opened, closed, opened again. I never... Viper picked up the family photograph from the desk. He studied it for a moment. Nice picture. Marsh's eyes snapped to it. Please don't touch that. Viper set it down carefully. 2 boys, he said. Marsh said nothing. Ace spoke quietly from the wall. Imagine someone shouting at them in a hallway. Marsh looked back at Bull. His confidence was fading fast. Bull tapped the stack of money once. Write the receipt. Marsh blinked. What? Paid in full. Marsh pulled open a drawer and fumbled for a receipt book. His hands shook slightly as he wrote. When he finished, he tore off the page and slid it across the desk. Bull glanced at it, then folded it and slipped it into his vest. Good. Marsh leaned back, trying to reclaim some control. Now that the balance is settled. Bull raised a finger slightly. The sentence died instantly. There's another thing. Marsh didn't like the sound of that. Bull's voice stayed calm. You're going to forget Emma Harrison. Marsh stared. What? You're not calling her. You're not knocking on her door. You're not standing in hallways waiting for her kid. Each sentence came slowly, measured. Her account is closed. Marsh shifted in his chair. You can't dictate how I run my properties. Viper leaned forward slightly. The office seemed to lose another inch of space. Sure we can. Marsh swallowed. Ace spoke again, quiet as ever. And you're going to leave Mrs. Gutierrez alone. Marsh blinked. What? 3rd floor, Ace continued. 72 years old. Marsh's face went pale. And the Tran family? Viper added. Apartment 2A. Marsh's lips parted. How do you... Bull placed both hands on the desk. Not hard. Just enough to make the wood creak. We ride through that neighborhood every Sunday. Marsh nodded quickly. Yes. Bull straightened. One last thing. Marsh waited. That door you kicked. Bull gestured toward the receipt. You're replacing it. Marsh nodded again. Of course. Solid core. Yes. This week. Yes. Bull picked up his gloves. The 3 bikers turned toward the door. Before leaving, Viper glanced back once. Marsh was still sitting behind the desk, staring at the stack of money that was no longer there. The door opened. Sunlight poured into the office. Outside, engines roared back to life. 3 motorcycles pulled away from the curb and disappeared down the street. Inside the office, Vincent Marsh sat perfectly still. The ticking fan continued its slow rhythm overhead. Tick, tick, tick. And for the first time since he'd started managing that building, Vincent Marsh understood something very clearly. Emma Harrison was no longer alone. By the time Bull, Ace, and Viper returned, the small apartment no longer felt the same. Something had shifted. Diesel had already brought the truck around, and the narrow hallway outside was crowded with movement. The men worked quietly, moving the few belongings Emma owned with careful efficiency. There wasn't much to pack. The mattress was rolled and tied with rope. A small cardboard box held Lily's clothes. Another held medical paperwork and hospital bills. Bones carried the oxygen tank like it was made of glass. Emma sat at the small table while Hawk helped her fill out a few papers for the hospital appointment Bones had already arranged over the phone. Lily stood near the window, watching the street. When the 3 motorcycles returned, she saw them first. "They're back," she said softly. Engines rumbled below the building, deep and steady. Razor stepped out onto the hallway balcony just as the bikes rolled to a stop. Bull removed his helmet and nodded once. That was enough. Razor didn't ask questions. Bull wouldn't have nodded if things weren't settled. Inside the apartment, Emma looked up. "Was that them?" she asked quietly. "Yes," Razor said. She studied his face carefully. "Is everything okay?" Razor slipped his gloves into his pocket. "It will be." Emma didn't ask more. Something in his tone made it clear the conversation was already finished. A few minutes later, the hallway filled again as Bull, Ace, and Viper climbed the stairs. Lily ran forward first. "Did you talk to him?" Bull crouched slightly so his massive frame didn't tower over her. "Sure did." "What did he say?" Bull smiled in a way that was warm this time. "He said your door's getting fixed." Lily nodded seriously. "Good." The men exchanged quick looks. Children had a way of focusing on the most important detail. Bones stood from the kitchen table. "Truck's ready," he said. Razor nodded. "Let's move." Diesel and Spider carried the mattress down first. The stairwell groaned under their steps, but the mattress cleared easily. Hawk followed with the box of clothes. Viper carried the cardboard box of paperwork. Bull lifted the oxygen tank again, and Razor walked beside Emma as she slowly made her way down the stairs. Each step took effort, but she refused help until the final landing. Outside, the late afternoon sun washed the street in pale gold. Neighbors stood along the sidewalk pretending not to stare. 8 motorcycles, 2 trucks, and a woman with an oxygen line being guided carefully into the passenger seat. Lily climbed into the truck beside Bull without hesitation, the stuffed rabbit still tucked beneath her arm. She watched the street through the window as Razor closed the door. "Where are we going?" she asked. Bull glanced at her. "You ever been to a place called the clubhouse?" She shook her head. "It's big," he said. "Lots of room. Do you have milkshakes there?" Bull chuckled. "We might." The trucks started first. Motorcycles followed. The convoy rolled slowly down the street. Apartment 4B disappeared behind them. Emma watched the building shrink in the side mirror. Her hands trembled slightly in her lap. Razor noticed. "You all right?" Emma nodded, though her eyes were distant. "I've just been there so long. Doesn't look like it treated you very well." "No," she admitted softly, "but it was still home." Razor didn't argue. He understood that kind of attachment. The kind people formed with places that held their memories even when those places had stopped being kind. They drove for nearly 20 minutes. The city slowly changed around them. Old storefronts gave way to wider streets. Then smaller neighborhoods. Finally, a long gravel road stretched ahead. At the end of it stood a low brick building surrounded by open land and a wide parking lot filled with motorcycles. The clubhouse. Lily pressed her face against the glass. "Whoa." Bull grinned. "Yeah." The convoy rolled into the lot. Engines shut down one by one. The quiet that followed was peaceful instead of tense. A few other riders stepped out of the building when they saw the trucks arrive. Curious eyes followed the group as they unloaded. Spider carried the mattress inside. Diesel grabbed the boxes. Bones helped Emma out of the truck and guided her carefully toward the front door. Lily climbed down last. She looked up at the building. It seemed enormous compared to the apartment she'd left behind. Inside, the clubhouse smelled like coffee and motor oil and wood polish. The large main room held a long wooden table, a worn couch, and a stone fireplace along one wall. Sunlight filtered through tall windows. It felt warm, safe. Bones guided Emma toward a side hallway. "We've got a spare room set up," he explained. "Quiet, clean, good air circulation." Emma looked around slowly. "You're sure this is okay?" Razor answered from behind her. "More than okay." Lily wandered toward the big table in the center of the room. She placed her stuffed rabbit carefully on top. Then she turned in a slow circle, taking everything in. The motorcycles outside, the wide open land, the men moving calmly around the building. Finally, she looked back at Razor. "Daddy used to come here?" Razor nodded. "Many times." She smiled. It was the first real smile anyone had seen from her that day. Then she walked back over to him and slipped her small hand into his. The gesture was simple, trusting. Razor felt something heavy settle quietly in his chest. Not a burden, a responsibility. Bull stepped beside him. "Doctor's appointment is tomorrow morning," Bones called from down the hallway. "Phoenix General already confirmed." Razor nodded. "Good." Lily squeezed his hand once. "You're really going to help my mommy?" Razor looked down at her. "Yeah, kid." Outside, the wind moved softly across the open lot, rustling the flags mounted along the clubhouse roof. Inside, the Brotherhood moved quietly around their new guests. For the first time in months, Lily and Emma Harrison were somewhere safe, and the promise written on the back of an old photograph was finally beginning to keep itself. Hospitals have a different kind of silence. Not the calm, quiet of early mornings or empty streets, but the heavy kind, the kind that sits on your chest and waits with you. The waiting room at Phoenix General was bright, almost painfully so. White walls, polished floors, rows of gray plastic chairs. A television mounted in the corner played a muted morning talk show that nobody was watching. 8 leather vests stood out in that room like black ink on fresh paper. Razor sat in the center row with his elbows resting on his knees, hands clasped together. Across the hall, a red *** surgery in progress *** light glowed steadily above the double doors where Emma had disappeared nearly 2 hours earlier. Bull leaned against the wall near the coffee machine, arms folded across his chest. Spider paced slowly back and forth along the windows. Diesel stood outside the glass doors talking quietly on the phone with someone from the chapter treasury. Hawk sat perfectly still in a chair near the hallway, watching, listening, waiting, and in the middle of them all sat Lily. Bones had insisted she stay close after the nurses wheeled Emma away that morning. Someone had brought her a pair of star-patterned pajamas from a store on the way to the hospital. The bright blue fabric with tiny white stars looked almost glowing against the dark leather jackets surrounding her. She sat cross-legged in the chair beside Razor, clutching the stuffed rabbit as if it were part of her. Every once in a while, she glanced toward the surgery doors. Then back to Razor. "How much longer?" she asked quietly. Razor checked the clock on the wall. "Not sure yet. Is Mommy okay?" "She's with the doctors," he said gently. Lily nodded, but the answer didn't quite settle her nerves. Across the room, Spider stopped pacing. "I hate hospitals," he muttered. Bull grunted. "Everyone does." Ace returned from the hallway carrying 2 cups of coffee. He handed one to Razor and kept the other for himself. "Doctor said 3 to 4 hours," Ace said. "That was 2 hours ago," Spider replied. "Which means we're halfway there." Lily listened to all of it carefully, absorbing the tone more than the words. The hospital doors opened briefly as a nurse passed through. Lily's head snapped up instantly. But it wasn't Emma. The doors swung closed again. The red light remained on. Lily's shoulders drooped slightly. Hawk stood up without saying a word and walked toward the hallway vending machine. A moment later, he returned with a small carton of chocolate milk. He held it out. "For you." Lily looked surprised. "Thank you." She accepted it with both hands. Hawk sat down again, quiet as always. Razor watched the exchange with a faint smile. Sometimes the quietest men were the ones paying the closest attention. Lily took a few careful sips of the milk before speaking again. "My mommy was really scared this morning." Razor nodded slowly. "That's normal." She tried not to show it. "That's normal, too." Lily thought about that. Daddy used to say, being brave doesn't mean you're not scared. Razor felt the words settle somewhere deep in his chest. That sounds like your dad. Bull spoke from across the room. He said that after the Utah run. Spider glanced up. Yeah. Lily looked between them. What happened in Utah? Bull chuckled softly. Your dad rode through a thunderstorm that turned the road into a river. Ace nodded. Visibility was about 10 feet, Spider added. We all pulled over except him. Why? Lily asked. Bull shrugged. Someone had to ride ahead and make sure the road was still there. And Daddy did? Of course he did. Lily smiled faintly. That sounds like him. The room fell quiet again. Minutes stretched. The clock on the wall ticked forward. Finally, Lily's eyes grew heavy. She leaned sideways against Razor's arm. Is it okay if I close my eyes for a little bit? She murmured. Of course. Her small body relaxed almost immediately. Within seconds, she was asleep, the stuffed rabbit tucked under her chin. Razor adjusted his position carefully so she wouldn't slide from the chair. Bull watched from across the room. She trusts you. Razor looked down at the sleeping child. Kids know things. Spider leaned against the window again. You thinking about Shadow? Razor didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached into the inside pocket of his vest and pulled out the folded photograph. The same photograph Lily had carried across 12 city blocks. He stared at the younger version of himself standing beside Shadow beneath a desert sky. They had been laughing. None of them had known yet how life would unfold. Spider noticed the photo. Flagstaff, he said quietly. Yeah, 23 years ago. Feels like yesterday. Bull shook his head slowly. Feels like a lifetime. The surgery light above the doors flickered. Everyone looked up instantly. The red glow switched off. The doors swung open. A surgeon stepped into the hallway, mask hanging loose around his neck. He scanned the waiting room. Family of Emma Harrison? 8 men stood at the same time. The doctor blinked slightly at the sight of them. Razor stepped forward. That's us. The doctor studied their faces for a moment before speaking. The surgery was successful. The tension in the room broke like glass. Spider let out a breath he'd been holding for hours. Bull's shoulders relaxed. Ace rubbed the back of his neck. Her lungs responded well to the procedure, the doctor continued. She's stable. Razor nodded slowly. When can we see her? She'll be in recovery for another hour. The doctor glanced down at Lily sleeping against Razor's arm. That her daughter? Razor looked down at the star-patterned pajamas. Yeah. The doctor smiled faintly. She can see her first. He turned to leave. Behind him, the waiting room filled with quiet relief. Bull clapped a heavy hand on Razor's shoulder. Shadow would have liked that. Razor looked down at the photograph one more time before slipping it back into his vest. Yeah, he said softly. I think he would. The first thing Emma noticed was the quiet. Not the uneasy quiet of an empty apartment or the strained silence of hospital rooms, but the gentle kind. The kind that comes with morning light and the distant hum of a coffee machine. She opened her eyes slowly. The ceiling above her wasn't the cracked plaster of the old apartment. It was smooth, wooden beams crossing a white-painted ceiling. Sunlight streamed through a wide window beside the bed, warming the room. For a moment, she didn't remember where she was. Then the memory returned. The hospital. The surgery. The men in leather vests waiting outside the operating room. Her chest rose slowly. Breathing felt different now, easier, deeper. The oxygen tube was gone. Only a small bandage rested near her collarbone. Emma carefully pushed herself upright. The room was simple but clean. A comfortable bed, a wooden dresser, and a chair beside the window. Someone had even placed a glass of water and a small vase with fresh wildflowers on the table. She swung her legs gently to the floor. Her body still felt weak, but not the way it had before. The door creaked softly. Bones stepped inside, carrying a mug of coffee. Well, he said with a small grin, look who's sitting up. Emma blinked in surprise. You're the one from the hospital. Guilty. He handed her the mug carefully. Doctor said you'll feel like a truck hit you for a few days. That's normal. Emma wrapped her hands around the warm cup. Where am I? The clubhouse, Bones replied. Guest room. She looked around again. You all just let people stay here? Sometimes. Emma hesitated. And Lily? Bones tilted his head toward the hallway. Kitchen. Emma stood slowly. Her legs wobbled but held. Bones stayed nearby just in case. When she stepped into the hallway, the smell of pancakes and coffee drifted through the building. Voices echoed from the main room. Emma followed the sound. The large wooden table in the clubhouse was crowded. Bull stood at the stove flipping pancakes on a giant skillet. Diesel poured orange juice into mismatched glasses. Spider sat with his boots kicked up on a chair, telling some story that made Ace laugh. And at the center of it all sat Lily. She wore the same star-patterned pajamas from the hospital, though the sleeves were rolled up twice. A huge pancake sat on the plate in front of her. When she saw Emma in the doorway, her eyes lit up instantly. "Mommy!" The chair scraped loudly as Lily jumped down and ran across the room. Emma dropped to her knees just in time to catch her. The hug was tight, so tight it made Emma laugh and cry at the same time. "You're awake," Lily said. "I am. Are you okay?" Emma pulled back slightly and touched her daughter's cheek. "I think I am." Lily nodded proudly. "I told them you'd be okay." Emma glanced around the room. Every biker at the table had gone quiet, giving them space. Bull turned the stove down and cleared his throat. "Breakfast?" he offered. Emma wiped her eyes quickly. "That smells amazing." "Best pancakes in Arizona," Spider said. "Don't listen to him," Ace added. "He burns half of them." "I do not." Emma smiled faintly as she sat at the table. For the first time in months, the knot of fear that had lived in her chest felt lighter. Razor entered from outside just then, carrying a small paper bag. He stopped when he saw Emma sitting up. "Well," he said. "Look at that." Emma met his eyes. "Thank you." Razor shrugged slightly. "Not done yet." He set the bag on the table. "Doctor wants you back for a follow-up in 2 weeks." Emma frowned. "That sounds expensive." Spider snorted. "You gotta stop worrying about that." Razor pushed the bag toward her. Inside were envelopes, hospital paperwork already stamped, asterisk, asterisk, peed, asterisk, asterisk. Emma stared at them. "You didn't." Razor sat down across from her. "We did." Her throat tightened. "I don't know how to thank you." "You don't." Lily lifted her pancake fork proudly. "Eat pancakes." The table laughed. Emma finally picked up the fork. The pancake was warm and fluffy, covered in syrup. She took a bite. It tasted like relief. Outside the clubhouse windows, motorcycles glinted in the morning sun. The wind moved gently across the open field surrounding the building. Emma watched Lily laugh at something Spider said and felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Safety. Across the table, Razor leaned back in his chair, watching the scene quietly. Bull poured another round of coffee. Hawk sat near the window reading a newspaper. The Brotherhood moved through the morning like it had 1,000 times before, but now 2 extra chairs at the table were filled. Lily finished her pancake and leaned toward Razor. "Are we staying here?" Razor looked at Emma. Emma looked around the room again. Then she nodded. "For a little while," she said. Lily grinned. "Good." She picked up the stuffed rabbit and placed it carefully on the table. "Daddy would like it here." The room grew quieter for a moment. Razor reached into his vest pocket and pulled out the folded photograph again. He looked at Shadow's smiling face. Then at Lily. "Yeah," he said softly. "I think he would." Time has a quiet way of moving forward. It doesn't roar like motorcycles or slam doors the way trouble does. Most of the time, it moves softly through mornings, through seasons, through small moments that slowly become memories. The first winter after Emma's surgery was the hardest. Recovery took patience. Bones drove her to every follow-up appointment in Phoenix, never once complaining about the early mornings or the traffic. The doctors monitored her lungs carefully, adjusting medication and therapy until breathing no longer felt like climbing a mountain. Some days Emma was strong. Some days she needed help walking across the clubhouse hallway. But every day Lily was there beside her. And every day the Brotherhood was there too. The clubhouse changed in small ways. A bookshelf appeared in the corner of the main room for Lily's picture books. Spider installed a small swing outside beneath the oak tree. Diesel built a wooden toy chest that quickly filled with stuffed animals, puzzles, and crayons. Bull claimed he didn't like children, but he was the one who made pancakes every Saturday morning. Spring came. Emma grew stronger. By the time summer arrived, she could walk across the open fields behind the clubhouse without needing to stop and rest. The day the doctor finally said the word asterisk, asterisk, stable, asterisk, asterisk, the entire Brotherhood celebrated. Spider brought home a cake, Bull grilled steaks. Even Hawk allowed himself half a smile. Lily declared it the best day ever. But the years didn't just pass for Emma. They passed for Lily, too. At 5 years old, she learned how to ride a bicycle across the gravel road outside the clubhouse. Diesel ran behind her the first time she pedaled on her own. At 6, she started school in the small town nearby. Every morning, a line of motorcycles would escort her down the road like a parade until the school bus arrived. The first time the bus driver saw 8 bikers waiting beside a little girl with a pink backpack, he nearly dropped his clipboard. Eventually, he got used to it. The town did too. At 7, Lily learned how to change a spark plug under Hawk's quiet supervision in the garage. At 8, Spider taught her how to throw a baseball properly. At 9, she insisted on helping Bull flip pancakes on Saturday mornings. The Brotherhood never tried to replace her father, but in their own ways, each of them helped carry the pieces of the life Shadow had left behind. Razor watched most of it quietly. He wasn't the loudest man in the room, and he didn't offer advice often. But Lily gravitated toward him the way children often do toward people who feel steady. He helped with homework at the long clubhouse table. He listened when she talked about school. And every year on her birthday, he took her for a ride. Not on the highway, just around the long gravel road that circled the fields behind the clubhouse. She would sit in front of him on the motorcycle, wearing a helmet far too big for her head, laughing every time the wind caught her hair. "You ride like Daddy," she once told him. Razor smiled but didn't answer. Years passed that way. Slow, steady, safe. Emma eventually found work again in a small medical office in town. The doctors there understood her medical history and allowed flexible hours. The job helped her rebuild something she had lost during the long months of illness. But she never forgot what had saved them. Neither did Lily. The photograph of Shadow remained in the clubhouse, framed now and mounted near the fireplace. Below it hung the phoenix symbol of the Brotherhood. Every Sunday morning, the men still gathered for coffee at Miller's Roadhouse. The booth was the same. The coffee was the same. But sometimes a young girl with bright eyes and a stuffed rabbit would sit beside them. And the diner had learned not to ask questions. Because everyone in that town understood something simple. Some families are born. Others are built. Years later, when Lily stood on the stage of her high school auditorium delivering her valedictorian speech, the room was packed. Teachers, students, parents, and 8 older men wearing clean leather vests in the back row. Emma sat near the front, tears already forming before Lily even began speaking. Lily adjusted the microphone. She looked older now, stronger, but the quiet determination in her eyes had never changed. "My father once told me something," she began. "He said the bravest thing he ever did wasn't riding motorcycles across the country." The auditorium grew still. "It was leaving that life so he could become my dad." Emma wiped her eyes. Lily continued. "But when my father died, I thought that meant I had lost everything." She paused, then smiled. But I was wrong. Her gaze drifted to the back row where the Brotherhood sat together. "Because sometimes," she said, "the promises people make outlive them." Razor looked down for a moment, rubbing his hands together quietly. Lily finished her speech with one final sentence. "My father taught me what courage looked like." She gestured gently toward the back of the room. "And the men who kept his promise taught me what loyalty looks like." The auditorium erupted in applause. But the Brotherhood remained seated for a moment. Not because they weren't proud, but because sometimes the strongest emotions arrive quietly. Razor finally stood. Bull clapped first. Spider whistled. Diesel wiped his eyes. And somewhere in the back of that crowded auditorium, it felt like a man named Shadow was still smiling.